Hi everyone, welcome to this new video of IELTS with Shane. Today we would be going to look at various unfamiliar IELTS topics, but before I do that, I'd like to clarify that I'm not a certified IELTS examiner or a coach. This video is made based on my own experience of giving IELTS examination, and it's more of like learning together rather than me teaching you. So let's begin. Today we would be talking about unfamiliar IELTS topics. Now, in previous video I talked about some of the tips that you could use in order to give your IELTS examination, and then we looked at a warm-up question that examiners mostly ask candidates at the beginning of their IELTS examination. Tell me more about yourself. But as you move through the examination, you would observe that the questions start becoming more specific and the topics are rather unfamiliar. This is because examiners are usually trained to identify the crammed responses and pre prepared responses by most candidates, and therefore they'd like to ask unfamiliar questions from the candidate in order to better assess their English speaking abilities. With more unfamiliar topics, it puts candidates much of like in an overwhelmed nervous position and they tend to make much more mistakes. It doesn't have to be that difficult in general. If you're unfamiliar with the topic, there are a few tips that you could use to improve your response and sound confident in front of the examiner. Remember, as I said earlier as well, IELTS is not a test of your knowledge, rather than it's an English speaking test, so the examiner is only testing how well you can speak English, not whether you're much more knowledgeable about the topic. So in this video, what we would do is we would look at various tips in order to craft a response for an unfamiliar IELTS topic, and then further look at an example, identify what is good about that example, which areas that we could improve from that response, and craft another response, the template of which you can then use in your own IELTS examination. You can use the tips that I have mentioned as well and further enhance that template as well for your own answers. So let's get started. Let's start by listening to this audio. Examiner has asked an unfamiliar question from Lucy, and this is how Lucy has responded.
Mm, uh, I don't know. Maybe I'd have a look at it. Not sure, sorry.
Now you must not respond like Lucy. Sometimes, like her, you would come across unfamiliar topics, but you must not do what she has done. Rather, there are a few tips that you could use to sound more confident. Unlike majority of the people, you should, instead of getting overwhelmed and saying I don't know, you should focus more about why you don't know about a specific topic. You could tell examiner, although I'm not familiar with this topic, but this is what I can say. So let's say examiner asks you about what do you find interesting about a small business? Rather rather than just getting confused and saying, I don't know what the small business is about, you can say, to be honest, I have never thought about it. I am not very interested in business. But now that you have asked about it, I'm much more interested in local cafes. And then you can further craft your answer around that. Along with that, you can end your answer by telling the examiner what would you do going forward to learn more about that thing. So let's say about small businesses, you can say, yeah, going forward, I'd like to know much more about how to run a business, what are the costs involved, how do profits and revenue works, and with these things, these are basic concepts. You know that when you run a business, you have some costs involved. You would earn something and you would get profit out of it. You could say, I would like to learn more about the business knowledge behind that, the operating cost, how you manage staff, and things like that. And finally, maybe you can add a personal reflection to your answer and use examples. Maybe you can say a local cafe in my neighborhood. Maybe you could talk about a small library. Maybe you could talk about the university cafeteria or anything like that, but use examples from your own personal life to add a bit of personality to your response and make it sound much more useful and confident for the for yourself, and how it would appear much more better in front of the examiner. So let's get into some examples, but before that, I would like to remind you again, examiner is testing your English speaking skills and not your knowledge of a specific topic. So it's completely fine if you don't know about the topic. All you need to do is display how well you can speak your English and remain confident. Confidence is the key. So, let's have a look at an example. The examiner asks, describe a small business you find interesting. This is how Lucy would respond. Actually, I've never thought about it before. Probably because I've not been an entrepreneur, I don't have an entrepreneurial mind and I'm not really interested in business. However, now that you have asked about it, small local cafes seem quite interesting to me. They are aesthetic and grab a lot of attention from teenagers. For example, our local coffee shop is popular among college students and is often busy during evenings. I assume they would make a lot of money from it. Let's analyze Lucy's response. What do you think were the good things about this response? Let's have a look together. So the response was fluent and coherent. She logically followed her answer, talking about why she doesn't know much about the topic, what does she know about it, and how it relates to whatever she has observed in her surroundings. She has talked about how small cafes are popular among students and that they are busy in the evenings, and has also tried to expand the answer by further giving an example of the local coffee shop in her neighborhood. Secondly, she has made a very good use of vocabulary. She has used words like aesthetic, entrepreneurial, and much more other vocabulary words that are very good for her. Thirdly, she has used the accurate tenses. So, although her sentence structure was a bit simple, but her tenses were quite accurate. For example, I assume they would make a lot of money out of it. Also, it not only is it a proper tense, but it also highlights her opinion, which shows an examiner that candidates had an ability of critical thinking. Fourthly, clear and natural pronunciation. Her pronunciation was clear and easy to understand. It's very important to have a clear pronunciation in order to score a higher band in IELTS. Ensure that you are speaking naturally and don't try to force accent. If you are good at a particular accent, definitely use it, but if you're not, don't try to force it. Finally, her response was creative and there were reasonable assumptions. Like I said earlier, she talked about why she doesn't know about the topic. It was an unfamiliar topic to her, but that doesn't put her off. That all You could also take a brief pause before framing your answer. It allows you to think about the response and what you want to say. So in Lucy's case, she mentioned why she's not familiar with the topic, and then thinking about it, she can say that the local coffee shop in her neighborhood, that is a small business that she is quite interested in, and then she kind of mentioned what are the reasons behind that interest. So she has mentioned more about the cafe is busy in the evening, it's a good local spot for university students as well as teenagers, and then I've tried to explain why is that, and she has made an assumption that they must be making good money from it. So let's look at how this response could further be improved. What do you think could be improved with regards to each aspect that we have previously mentioned as well? Let's look together. So, her response could better be organized and she could use connectors more of like in addition to, moreover, to expand her answers and link the sentences better to each other. Linking words can improve your response a lot, so I would appreciate and encourage all of you to start using them in responses that you create. Additionally, she could have expanded on adjectives, and mentioned more specific details. So she could have used adjectives like the cafe is trendy, it has charming interior, or specific details about what makes the cafe aesthetic. Is it the cafe's ambience, the overall interior design, music in the cafe? What is making the cafe aesthetic? It would not only allow you to expand your answer, but would enable you to use more diverse vocabulary and would offer examiner a better chance to score you. Additionally, she is also she could have also used complex sentences. Now, although Lucy has used tenses correctly, her sentences are very simple in structure, but she could have used more complex sentences to improve her response. For example, she could have said, "Small cafes often have a charming aesthetic design that appeals to young people." Again, like previously mentioned, clear and natural pronunciation is very important. If you are not very clear on pronunciation, you should avoid using certain words or certain accents that you can't use. Last but not least, she could have added more depth to her response. For example, I said earlier, she could have talked about what makes the cafe aesthetic, what could be the broader impact of overall revenue that the cafe is generating. It shows the critical thinking to the examiner and is very useful for achieving a higher score. So overall, I would rate this response a band 6 to 6.5. Now, let's incorporate all these things that we have identified and what further could have been improved in Lucy response to craft a new higher band response. So, let's start from beginning. Examiner asks you, describe a small business you find interesting. This is how Lucy would respond normally. She would take a pause and then she would say, honestly, I hadn't thought much about this before, but now that you've mentioned it, local coffee shop seems like a good business idea, especially during busy hours. For example, our local cafe is very popular because of its stylish interior and charming atmosphere, which draws a lot of teenagers and university students. The vintage furniture and unique murals make it Instagrammable and perfect for trending social media posts. Although I'm not very familiar with the specifics of running a business, such as staffing or cost, I would like to learn more about how small businesses operate on daily basis, such as managing cost while staying profitable. Now, this is a very well crafted response from Lucy. She has taken a bit of pause in the beginning, told the examiner that hasn't really thought about this topic before, but now that examiner has mentioned it, she thinks it's a good idea. The coffee shop, especially when it's a peak time, and then she has used the example of her local coffee shop in her neighborhood, and she has mentioned why the cafe is very popular among university students and teenagers because of its stylish interior and charming atmosphere. Then she has gone on to the details about the vintage furniture and unique wall murals that make it very trending spot for teenagers and Instagrammable. They could go there, do a bit of photography, capture social media post, and then she has gone on to the details of what she is not familiar with. So she is not familiar with the specifics of running a business, such as what costs are involved, what is day-to-day operations, how to staff the cafe, and she has told the examiner this is something she'd like to learn about, how to operate a business, how to pay all these costs and still remain profitable. So this is a very well crafted response. However, I've not rated it. I've not mentioned how to further improve this because all of us are learning together. I would like you to score this response and leave a comment below on how this further could be improved to achieve a higher band score. That's all for today. Don't forget to press the bell icon and I'll see you with the next video. Thank you.